Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure once again to be speaking at the Palestine Center. It's always a delight to be amongst friends, and I thank the Center for extending an invitation to us today. This tour, I think, this is our first engagement, and so I think this one is this tour is going to be a very interesting one. We're going to a number of different cities, some big, some small, and it follows on the heels of obviously this election. But I think that more importantly than the election is that this tour will be able to give us an opportunity to really try to cement and make some of the connections that I think a lot of us have known in the past that exist between what Israel's doing and apartheid that existed in the past, and will allow people to sort of make that connection between the two. So when I was first, I just want to start a little bit by talking about my own personal experience. The first time I was, as Catherine said, I was born and raised in Canada, and you don't really talk about a lot in Canada other than the weather, and that's about it. And there's an occasional election, but that's about it. But I remember the first time that I ever traveled to Israel was in 1987, and I was a teenager at the time, very young, and I kind of grew up in a bubble, which Canada is. Not really knowing that I was Palestinian and not really being told that I was Palestinian or what any of that meant at all. But at the time I was a teenager, and there was a great deal of talk about Nelson Mandela and apartheid. And so my first trip to Israel, not knowing anything about what was going on there, I didn't know about, this is really embarrassing, but I'm going to say this, I didn't know about the plight of the refugees, even though my parents are refugees. I didn't know about the occupation that was going on. So it was a big awakening for me. And I remember the day that I first started to question what was going on in Israel. And again, this is a long time ago. This was 1987, the start of the first Intifada. A friend of mine who is Israeli, I asked her, so I don't understand what's going on. What's happening here? And she said, well, you hear a lot about apartheid, right? And I said, yes. And she said, well, it's the exact same thing. And it didn't really make sense to me that this was the exact same thing as apartheid South Africa. But the more that I began to realize what was happening there, and the more that I learned about it, the more that I recognized that it was indeed South Africa. It was indeed apartheid. And I was fortunate enough about I guess I'm trying to think of what year, and I think 2003 was the first time I actually visited South Africa. And it was a very emotional experience for me visiting South Africa, because the words that my friend had told me back in 1987, that this exactly was apartheid, really struck home to me when I got a chance to visit different areas throughout South Africa, learn and hear people's experiences, and really make the connection that what is going on in Palestine exactly mimics what is happening, what used to happen, or what had taken place in South Africa. There are obviously a number of distinctions and differences between what the South African apartheid regime did and what Israel is doing, and we can talk about those at question and answer. But there is kind of a central theme that was taking place, that I saw there, that I see now in Palestine, which is the idea of not just separation, but as Eddie had mentioned, the sort of a theological underpinning to the idea of separation, and a belief that somehow or another that one people is better than another. And these are the experiences that I've witnessed in Palestine. Now, I want to just go through a number of different slides and maps, just to try to make the point about how this idea of separation is taking place. But while I do that, I want to make it very clear that while South Africa was undergoing a process of ending apartheid, what was happening in Palestine has been a process of actually deepening apartheid, all the way beginning from far back as 1993. So as I go through these slides, I'm going to try to highlight just some of the settlements and what's taking place at the settlements there, at the settlements and the checkpoints. I'm going to go through a little bit of the wall and what impact the wall is having. I'm going to take you through a few slides, if we have some time, on Gaza and what's happening there, and then hopefully be able to open it up for questions. So bear with me, this is the first time that I'm using the PowerPoint presentation, and anybody who knows me knows I'm not very good at this. So the first slide that I'm showing you right now is, there it is of the West Bank, and with some of the major cities that are demarcated. And as you're going to see, here's the Palestinian population that is coming up on the map. The next slide is that of the Israeli settlements. Now, the Israeli settlements, it's interesting that when you take a look at the settlements, the settlements in their main purpose have been both to be, one, defined as security settlements, and two, for ideological reasons. But in their ideological underpinnings, one of the major things that has happened with the settlements is that when I first went in 1987 and I went to see my first settlement, at the time you had to sort of go through a series of kind of dirt roads to try to get to the settlements. Now it's kind of the exact opposite. It's now, in order to get to a Palestinian area, you have to go through dirt roads to be able to get to a Palestinian area, where the idea of the settlements and the roads that the settlements are now occupying are actually taking foremost authority and presence. Again, undermining the theory that Palestinians and Israelis, A, can't live together, and B, if they can't live together, then Israelis have to have superior rights. So on this next slide that you've just seen that I've pulled up, what I've done is I've put on the Israeli closed military areas. And so this is the way the West Bank looks right now. You've got the Palestinian areas that are demarcated in yellow. You've got the settlements that they're supposed to be purple, I hope they are, purple, and then the closed military areas that are in the West Bank. Now, there's closures, and you hear a lot about closures and checkpoints and so on and so forth. Now, I want to make it clear that the checkpoints and the closures are not new. This is not new. This is, very interestingly, around the same time that South Africa was going through its period of ending apartheid, was the very beginning of the phases of beginning of apartheid for the Palestinians. The checkpoints that we see now, and you're going to see a bunch of them come up, are there weren't as many back in 1994 when the Oslo agreements were signed, but they were in fact there. And the idea behind the checkpoints was simply to do that, which is to demarcate and separate Palestinian from Israeli. Now, as I said, there weren't as many as there are now, but the idea is not a new one. And so what I'm trying to get at is that as South Africa was going through a process of trying to break down these checkpoints, break down these areas and differences between South Africans, what's actually happening in Palestine is quite the opposite, that we've seen a skyrocketing of these checkpoints and trenches. Here's some trenches. That's what a trench looks like if you haven't seen them. It's going to come up. And so you're beginning to see a picture of the road barrier and the wall. You're beginning to see a picture of what the framework of separation and closure actually is beginning to look like. Here, the solid black line is the wall. And increasingly, you're beginning to see the formation of small cantons and small cantons within the West Bank. Now, these are figures from the UN. This was as of the end of September of this year. There are 607 of these roadblocks, and you can go through. I'm going to leave the presentation with Summer in case anybody's interested. Now, interestingly, is that this chart here actually tracks the number of closures that have taken place in the West Bank since December of 2003 until April of 2008. The interesting thing is there was a U.S. brokered agreement on movement and access, which was brokered in November of 2005. And what you can see is that there's been an absolute increase of 53% since the agreement of movement and access was signed. This was an agreement that was supposed to try to facilitate movement and access rather than try to increase closure.